What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of Dauntless Outdoors. Today's episode, we are up in kind of the panhandle area of Florida. Goal of today's episode is to commercially shoot as many American red snapper as possible and whatever other good fish we see. So, as you saw, just got my first snapper of the day. This was actually my first dive. Hopped in the water, diving these towers up here. They're like radio towers that the military uses. But shot this guy right to the gill plate, not going anywhere, didn't ruin any meat, and really nice one to start out the day. So deep diving this same tower. Done a couple more dives, but they're a little more skittish, but they're still not too smart just yet. So there's a murk layer about 30-40 feet down, and get down here, and a ton of them are curious as to what I am, and they swim up out of the murk layer. So take a shot on one of the bigger ones that's pretty close, and as you can see, there was a little murk layer. So got a good holding shot on this one. Kind of a weird shot. It went through the gills and out the mouth. Didn't even actually hit the fish. Kind of just went through his little gill area. But now I'm giving a backup shot on this guy because I can see the flopper's just about to come out. I think Drake took a longer shot on this guy than he wanted to. But took the shot and landed another nice snapper. So now I'm headed back down, same area. Looking around, not seeing anything crazy just yet. There's a couple out in the distance. There was some really good viz on top. The top viz was like 70-80 foot, but as soon as you got to that murk layer, they couldn't see nearly as much. So what I was doing was I would go all the way down, basically to the murk layer, so I can still see the ones up in the water column that are like up in the clear layer, but also those ones down in the murk layer will get pretty close before I get a shot. And this guy reacted to the grunting pretty well. Came in to check what I was. Got a really good stone shot there, and I got to the surface. And I think on average these are all about 15-pound snapper, which is, I don't know how big they do get, but they're some of the bigger ones that I've shot. So it's definitely a really fun time. Don't get that many of them down in the Bradenton area, so it's pretty fun to see this many of them, especially this shallow. I'm only shooting them at like 40 foot, so it's not like it's a really hard feat. You do have to be kind of smart about approaching them so you don't spook them off. Right there I just missed, unfortunately, and I reloaded, headed on back down. These fish started getting a little bit smarter, so they wouldn't give me as easy as shots, just because there was 4 of us in the water. We were all taking some pretty easy shots on these things, so they were like, ooh, I don't know about that one anymore. So another shot. I don't know how I missed those two, but I missed some pretty easy shots right there. Kind of unfortunate, but oh well. So now I'm headed back down, and what I'm doing as I'm headed down is I'm looking like I'm keeping my head straight and I'm looking the other way, so that way when I flatten out I know that there'd be some behind me if there were any, and I didn't see any there, so I decided to keep heading on forwards a little bit. And you can see there's a ton of them. It's just picking out one of the bigger ones or which one is the biggest, which is pretty hard to tell when they're on like 8 foot of viz. So but got a good holding shot on one that I liked and dragged him up to the surface. Being pretty cautious about keeping these fish close to me, trying to keep them away from the sharks because we started seeing a good bit of them. And as you see, I'm starting to brain this fish, and I look up, and I think that's Drake's fish that is getting mauled by some sharks. Gets ripped in half, and the shark took off. So that's why you want to attempt to keep these fish as close to you as possible. Got that guy secured, and we weren't really seeing that many more of them at that spot that were not as smart as they were when we got there. So showed up at a new spot, different tower, and somebody else had shot an AR already, and you have to gut them. So I head down here towards a little chunk of their guts, and they're pretty curious fish, so they swim up to it, and this one gave me a little bit too easy of a shot. Took it and completely stoned him there, so I was pretty happy about that one. It's always fun to get a nice stone shot in. So headed up to the surface and got another nice one. So now I'm headed back down. These fish were also relatively similar to the last ones. Started taking a couple shots and they'd smarten up a good bit. So it's kind of a bad situation when that happens, because there's such a big murk layer that they can go hide anywhere and you can't see them. So I don't really like that type of diving. I like when you can just head to the bottom and actually get the fish there. But this was a pretty different experience and it's fun to do. So I started to head back up just because I wasn't going to see any in the murk layer, and I was just going to do a bottom drop. But as soon as I headed up, I saw one that followed me up a little bit, so I was like, okay, I might be able to get a shot on him. And sure enough, he turned, gave me a shot, and I got a good holding shot, so I headed up to the surface. Try and keep him up in the water column. There were still more sharks here too, so got a nice shot on him. So I think this is one of my first dives that I actually went to the bottom, and I included this one just because you can see the full tower. And I'm headed down. There's a ton of mangrove snapper, so once they started seeing less Americans, they started shooting those guys. But I wanted to see what was down at the bottom, and Drake also told me he lost a shaft here the day before because he was doing a 3-day trip up here. So he asked if I could go down and grab it, so I went down here, and of course my GoPro does die in this clip, but I get down here, spot the shaft over to the left, swim over and grab it, and as soon as I grabbed it, it turned out to the sand, and there was a nice AR that I shot and stoned. But actually I didn't stone it, he got wrapped up a little bit and I pulled him free, but unfortunately didn't get that on video because my GoPro died. But now I'm doing another drop where I'm actually headed down towards the bottom. Cut off a few seconds, but right there, if you go back and pause it where you can still see him, there's a really big gag. He was probably about a 25-pounder. Thing was huge. Hardly ever see those around us, and if you do, they're really smart. That guy was not too smart, so it's pretty cool to see that. So get down here. The viz is pretty bad. It's like 10, 15 foot, and when there's that big of a murk layer at this depth, the viz is really dark, so it's like harder to see everything. And I don't think you guys could even see that snapper, but got a nice holding shot and pretty quickly. But he's pretty small, honestly. I was starting to do some bottom drops because we weren't seeing any more up in the water column. And this is why I do like to see them on the bottom in our area, like the Bradenton area. If we're commercially hunting these, you can just go to the bottom, whether it's 110 foot or not. This is like 100 foot, so some pretty deep dives relatively. So, but in our area, if you head on down to the bottom, that's where they typically hang out. They'll be within about 20 foot of the bottom. Sometimes they'll be up, sometimes they'll stick to it, but it's a lot easier to hunt them that way just because you know where they're actually at. The big ones here, there was plenty more of them, we just weren't seeing them because they weren't down there. They were just hiding in the murk, but decided it was time to move on, so now we're at a different spot here. We weren't really seeing any more there that were worthwhile, so this is about 30, 40 foot. The bottom's like 108, 110, but I didn't actually go down there at any point just because there was a huge layer of silt and the only reason there was that big of a thermocline and silt layer was because there was like really heavy winds the day before. So overnight the vids got a lot worse, but ended up securing a pretty nice one there. They're all pretty big except for the last two before that I shot at the bottom. But this is a pretty cool situation here. Just heading down, and I've never really seen this with all these AJs up in the water column and this many American Reds. Like, this is a pretty new style of diving for me, so I thought it was really cool to see them. And with that Merc layer, the one unfortunate thing is the sharks can get up on you a lot faster than if you don't have a Merc layer. So like, if I were to shoot that fish and I was down there and I tried to like get a hold on him as I was down there, a shark could sneak up on me pretty quick just because it can't see nearly as far as I could if there wasn't that layer of silt. But that's why I was just keeping my reel tight and just heading up to the surface as fast as I could, because there's no real reason to stick around if you already have a holding shot on a fish. So, and as you can see, I'm looking at a couple ARs below me and out to my left. So what I'd start to do, and I realized they'd get a little bit less spooked from, is I'd like swim in one direction, and I'd look below me. Yeah, I have a better clip later in the video, but I'd start to swim just in a straight direction, typically away from them, and they get curious as to what you are, so they'll start to follow you away. And if you look below you as you're swimming, so like you put your head straight down and look towards your fins, you'll see the fish following you, and then you can typically slowly turn around and actually get a pretty good shot on the fish. So that's what I was typically doing here. Sometimes you'd see them from the surface and you could just do like a bomb drop and just get a pretty easy shot on them. But this one's a little different. Saw a nice mangrove in the water column. I'd seen a few mangroves already, but this one was the biggest one I'd seen, and it was definitely a pretty nice one. So decided I was going to take a shot on him, and got that stone shot there. Makes it a lot easier to not have to fight the fish and cause a bunch of commotion. But what we were doing here is we'd all, just as soon as you shot the fish, you'd gut it, and all those guts are what has those seagulls up on the surface, and also it'd be what keeps the ARs up in the water column. So that's what we were doing here. The actual AJs don't like to eat the guts. It was kind of weird. It's a pretty weird situation there, but as you see, the ARs weren't nearly as scared as they were as the last two spots. Probably because this is like a private wreck. It's not as public as a tower, so that's what we're doing here. Is we're just looking for a ton of them. And I think it was about a dive or two before this that we spotted a school of APs that were swimming just above the Merc layer. Just landing a nice shot there, but spotted a nice school of APs above the Merc layer, which you typically won't see them if you're just sitting at the surface, but we did on this day. We saw a couple of them, and I don't know if you just saw that, but Drake shot an American Red, and it was getting sharp down there, so we were being pretty cautious about trying to keep our fish up, trying to keep our fish as close to us as possible. This is just a dive where I'm headed down. The shark swims right up to me, but I decided it was smarter to just go up and do a different dive than try and negotiate with the sharks on that dive. But as I was saying about the APs, we saw them a couple times from the surface, so we knew they were in the area, but it was pretty hard to land a shot on them just because the viz was so good at the top that you couldn't actually get close to them. And I was being pretty aware of where they were. I was trying to find them just because they're pretty fun fish to shoot. But as you see here in a second, I head on down here, and unfortunately I hadn't seen them yet, but there were still a ton of them, so that's all we were doing, is just shooting a bunch of ARs and just throwing their guts back out, hoping to see the APs. But this is a pretty cool dive here. Get down here to about 40-ish foot, right above the murk layer, and just start swimming along. Turn around, not seeing much. Turn the other way, and as you can tell, AR was following me, wanted to see what I was doing. I had a pretty nice shot on this fish, and do the typical, try and keep him close to me. But you'll see here in a second, this one doesn't turn out as well as the last couple, so pretty unfortunate, but oh well. Get to the surface, try and keep an eye on my fish as much as I can. Like to get a couple recovery breaths once I get to the surface, but as soon as I look back down, there's a shark terrorizing my fish. I'm like, no, trying to get him up as quick as I can. But typically they won't stay on him this close, but he definitely didn't care that much that I was there. They kind of got used to us being here by now, and they were just hungry at that point. So, kind of sad about that one. And the shark definitely didn't mind that I was here. He was definitely very happy to see me. Kind of unfortunate. Can't sell a fish once you shoot it, so I had to drop that one back down. But this dive here is Troy gets a shot in one of those APs I was talking about. It takes off, takes out a bunch of line, and Drake is right there next to him. So Drake's helping him out, trying to land this fish. So I decided I was gonna go for another dive here. Go back down, looking around, and spot a pretty good AR that I wanted a shot on. So I slowly turn towards him. Try and line up the gun pretty slow so I don't spook him. Take that shot, and you know it's gonna hold. So I head on up to the surface, and as I'm swimming up, I'm trying to be cautious, look around for Troy and Drake, make sure they're doing all good with that AP, and get up here. Brain my fish so I'm not dealing with him flopping around, and I go back over to Troy and Drake. They were just getting that fish up to the surface, so I swim down, try and grab its tail. Thing freaks out and I lost a grip on his tail. Typically I would go for the gills, but he was facing away from me, and Drake's puts a backup shot in him, so I knew the fish was good. And as I'm sitting here, pulled the shaft through my fish just because I saw that shark coming up and I didn't want to not have anything to separate us. But there's Troy's AP, definitely a nice one. We're pretty stoked that we got that guy. So kept diving. It was getting pretty late in the day now, so we think Drake had already hopped back in the boat and he was starting to get those fish on ice. He's got a bunch of fish from this spot that he's throwing in the cooler now. But as you can see, a couple nice ARs. Took the shot on the bigger one there because he gave me a nice easy shot. And as you see, I lost that one AR to the shark, so now I'm doing my best to really horse these fish up, and you'll hear in a second somebody shouts shark, and I look back down and that thing's coming right up towards that fish. Luckily that I had a buddy diver down there just to spook the sharks off and land the fish. As you can see, I'll look back down here in a second, and that shark's still on me, but now that I'm this close to the fish, he's not gonna go for it. So got another one. That was the 17th AR that I just shot. And now I just reloaded my gun. I'm sitting on the surface, well, I didn't just reload my gun. I threw that fish in the boat, and I'm sitting on the surface, about to reload my gun, and I spot the school of APs that I was talking about. So I followed the school slowly and calmly on the surface, and I reloaded my gun as quick as I could. And now I'm doing a couple recovery breaths just to make sure I'm ready to go down here and actually do a legit dive, because if you do a rush dive and you don't have enough time and you actually spook the school off, then you never get a shot. So took my time, got a couple nice breaths in, followed that school slowly. You can see there's one AP that's a little bit closer than the rest, but I spotted a bigger one, bigger by probably 5 pounds or so, bigger than the rest of them, and I knew I had to take the shot on that one. So took the shot, broke his spine, and I was pretty stoked about this one. So especially for following him around that much, it's definitely a cool dive there.
Yes, sir.
Nice, dude.
So now I hop back in the water, and I think that AP was about 25-30 pounds. Didn't get an actual weight on him, but that's just my guess on a gutted fish. So headed back down here. It was pretty late. I think I was the only one in the water at this point. There was a bunch of fish on the deck, and Drake's got a 21-foot Key West, so there's not much flotation. And I jokingly said I'll hop back in, and they were like, all right, go for it. So I wasn't gonna decline the offer to go shoot some more fish, so I hopped back in the water. I'm all by myself here, so I'm trying to keep these fish up and away from that murk layer, pull them up as quick as I can, especially for diving by yourself. You don't really want to risk having to deal with a bunch of sharks. So pull this fish up as quick as I could, and as soon as I get to the surface, get a hand on this fish, and I spot a shark here in a second. I didn't have the greatest shot on this fish, so I was kind of playing him a little bit light. Push him out of the water, and I did my best to land this fish. And I see that shark swims right up to me. Try and poke him off, and since I'm the only one in the water, he definitely doesn't mind swinging back around. He does this for probably the next 3 or 4 minutes. I was a little bit far from the boat, so I was swimming away from him, just keeping my eye on him, and slowly kicking back towards the boat. But he definitely wasn't trying to give me plenty of breathing room, so I was being cautious about him. But got that fish to the boat, and now I decided I was only going to take shots that I knew I could really securely land the fish. But I may or may not have lied there. I saw this fish swimming away, and I was like, oh, I gotta take the shot. So took a little bit longer of a shot here, barely nicked him, and he pulled off. But he's definitely not injured. He'll be fine. Get back up to the surface, and I did a couple more drops in between this. Saw a couple sharks, so I decided I was gonna play it safe. I passed on a couple ARs before this, and as you see, there's one right there that's giving me a pretty easy shot. So I just keep slowly dropping towards him, trying not to spook him off, but he didn't really want to play with me. So I waited till this guy got a little bit higher in the water column, took a passing shot, and I knew I would land it there. So got a good holding shot and didn't deal with any sharks on this dive. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, hit that like button, subscribe. But this was the last dive of the day. It was about 5:30, which it's definitely time to head back to the shore. So I'll catch you in the next one.
Meow.